Today, we're going to unpack the incredible story of how one of history's most famous kingdoms went from this amazing golden age of unity all the way to a tragic collapse. It's a powerful lesson in leadership, faith, and what happens after one really, really bad decision. Let's get into it. And really, this question right here, this is the spark that lights the whole fire. It's a choice that sets off this crazy chain reaction with consequences that would echo for generations. So let's see exactly how it all went down. All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to break this down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at the demand that changed everything. Then, we'll dive into the golden age of the United Kingdom. After that, we'll see the fracture that literally split the nation in two. Compare the very different paths they took, and wrap up with the final warnings that, tragically, nobody listened to. Okay, so our story kicks off with this massive shift in how the nation saw itself. See, Israel was totally unique. They were what you'd call a theocracy, which means they saw God as their one and only king. But then, they started looking around at all the powerful empires next door, and they decided, hey, we want what they have. And this was their big demand. They wanted a human king they could actually see, a general to lead them into battle, just like everybody else. It sounds kind of simple, but this request was a huge deal. They were basically choosing to swap out their divine king for a human one. And just like that, the monarchy was born. And for a while, it was a genuine golden age. They had a single, powerful, united kingdom ruled by 3 really famous and very different kings, and each one left a huge mark on history. First up, you've got Saul, who was chosen to be the nation's very first king. He was followed by David, the shepherd boy who became this legendary warrior king. And finally, David's son Solomon, whose reputation for wisdom and absolutely massive building projects was known all across the ancient world. Saul started out great. He was on fire. He united the tribes, won these amazing military victories. But that success came with a pretty serious flaw: pride. He started to disobey direct commands, trusting his own gut over God's. And you can see it right here. That promising start just gives way to a guy building a monument to himself. That arrogance, it was his undoing. But then comes David, and he is just a completely different story. Now, he wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. But his core motivation, his heart, was in sync with God's. And that one fundamental difference would define his entire time as king. David did some incredible things. He solidified the kingdom and established Jerusalem as its capital. But his greatest passion, his real dream, was a project he'd never get to finish himself: building a permanent temple to house the Ark of the Covenant, that sacred chest that represented God's presence. He spent years gathering all the materials and drawing up the plans, leaving the actual construction for his son. All right, now on to Solomon. When he takes the throne, he gets this unbelievable offer: ask for anything you want. And he doesn't ask for money or a long life or victory over his enemies. He asks for wisdom so he can lead the nation well. And God was so impressed, he gave him not only wisdom, but all the other stuff he didn't even ask for. And Solomon's biggest claim to fame? It was finishing his dad's dream project. He built the temple. This thing was magnificent. It was a massive upgrade, replacing the portable tent, the tabernacle that they had been using for centuries. It became the permanent physical center of the nation's spiritual life. So things are looking pretty great under Solomon, right? The kingdom is at its peak. But, as you can probably guess, this is where the cracks start to show. The story takes a really dramatic turn right here. See, Solomon had this interesting strategy for international peace. He married foreign princesses to create alliances. Smart, right? Well, it came with a huge spiritual price tag. The source tells us his many, many foreign wives ended up turning his heart away from God and toward their own gods, which set a really dangerous example for the whole nation. So, after Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam takes over. And the people come to him with a pretty simple and honestly a very reasonable request. See, all of Solomon's huge building projects, they were paid for with super heavy taxes and forced labor. The people were just wiped out. All they wanted was for the new king to ease up a little bit. So Rehoboam is at a crossroads. He's got 2 groups giving him advice. The elders, the guys who advised his wise father Solomon, they say, listen to them, give them a break, serve them, and they'll serve you forever. But his buddies, the young guys he grew up with, they told him something totally different. No way! Be even tougher. Show them who's boss. And in what has to be one of the worst leadership moves, maybe ever, he goes with his friends. His reply is just jaw-droppingly arrogant. He basically tells the people, "You think my father was tough? My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. I'm going to make things even harder on you." And that was the breaking point. That was the last straw. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel just said, "We're done," and walked away. They refused to be ruled by a king that foolish. And just like that, the United Kingdom, built up over generations by Saul, David, and Solomon, was completely shattered. From that moment on, one nation becomes two. And these two new kingdoms, well, they're going to have different leaders, very different destinies, and totally different relationships with God. Let's take a look at how their fates compare. So the 10 tribes that left, they form the northern kingdom, called Israel. Their first king is a guy named Jeroboam, and its history, honestly, is just a mess of instability and unfaithfulness. Get this, not a single one of its 19 kings is considered a good guy. It burns through 5 different royal families, and eventually it's completely conquered and scattered by the Assyrian Empire. Meanwhile, the 2 tribes that stuck around with Rehoboam, they became the southern kingdom, known as Judah. It was a lot more stable. It had only one continuous dynasty, the family line of King David. It had a mix of good kings and bad kings, but it too eventually fell into idolatry and was conquered, this time by the Babylonians. Okay, this chart really lays it all out, side by side. It's super clear. You see the split right away, 10 tribes up north, 2 down south. Then look at the king's legacies, all wicked in the north versus a mixed bag in the south. And the dynasties? Total chaos in Israel with 5 different lines versus that one single continuous line of David and Judah. But here's the kicker. Despite all their differences, they both end up in the same place, conquered and in exile. But you have to know, this whole collapse, it didn't just happen overnight in silence. Throughout this entire period of decline, there were voices, loud voices, crying out and trying to stop the disaster before it was too late. God kept sending prophets, guys like Elijah, Isaiah, and Jeremiah, to both the northern and the southern kingdoms. And their message was always the same. Turn back from your idols, come back to God, or you're going to be destroyed. But the whole tragedy of this entire story can be summed up in those 4 simple words. They would not listen. And that kind of brings us full circle, right? It leaves us with this big lingering question. The story of this kingdom is ancient, sure, but the themes feel brand new. It forces us to ask ourselves, what happens to any group, or any nation for that matter, when its leaders choose pride over wisdom and its people just refuse to hear the warnings? This story gives a pretty sobering answer, leaving us to think about what that means for us today.